Recording. Boop, there we go. All right. Good morning again. Welcome. Couple quick things to remember. Number one, don't forget about report card night tonight. That's at 5:30. There will be a Zoom link sent out. Both you and your parents or guardians can attend that Zoom link. Ask questions about report cards for term 2, stuff about term 3. Um, Graduation, if you have any questions about that. I will be there along with all the other teachers, and Dr. Dave, Mr. Gary, Miss Kelsey. So please do attend if you can. We'd love to see you there. Also, remember progress report number 1 is coming out next week. So that means all the work is due end of the day Friday. So like midnight Friday night. All right. We're going to have something that I'm going to explain in a little bit that is going to be due for that progress report. Um, and I'll talk about, absolute, last time to turn it in by in case you can't get it all done by Friday. And then don't forget, no class Monday. We've off for President's Day. All right. I think that is it announcement wise. All right. Any questions about anything with that before we keep going here?
Anything need to be done to this class?
Can you say it one more time, Jay, or I had a hard time hearing you?
Does anything need to be done for this class?
Yeah, we're gonna have something that I'm gonna talk about later today. It's gonna be like a little web quest activity that you guys are gonna have to do for the progress report. So that being said, let's jump in then, and we'll start with our last crash course video. And again, if you were here Monday, you remember we watched a few of those, and they talked about kind of the beginning of film history, and we learned about stuff like cross cutting, which is cutting back and forth between two different things so we give the impression they're happening at the same time. We gotta get pans, which is left to right, tilts up and down, the way we move the camera, how moving the camera and stuff like that can help tell the story, and how we had all those innovations at the beginning of the film era, and also just the origin and history of, hey Kanaya, of movies themselves. So as a little bit of a review, that's what I'd like to pose in the chat right now. So if you were here Monday, you were following along with those. Where does the term movie come from? Right? If you remember that guy with the glasses and the kind of bald head, what was he? When he was talking in those videos, where do we get the term movie from? What is actually moving that makes it a movie that we can date back, in some cases, all the way to cave painting times?
Hello?
Hey, Kanaya.
I'm going to go to the store real fast, okay?
Okay. Any thoughts on that? You can put it in the chat or you can come off mute, but where does the term movie come from? What do we learn gives it its name? What are the things that are actually moving that make it a movie? Hey, Relisha.
The damn. You can say moving images.
Yeah, exactly, Jay. Moving images or pictures, right? That's why we still call it a motion picture today, right? Because pictures are things that are moving. So it was called a movie or moving picture, which is an old-timey word for like a collection of pictures. And so we just shorten that to movie. And so think about that. When we think about this, the scope of the technology. So we go from literally using fire to make it look like the cave paintings are dancing on the walls to something like Avatar or Avengers Endgame, or some of the movies that we have today. So think about how much that technology has increased. But yes, at the heart of it, the term movie comes from moving pictures. So it all started with kind of illusions to trick our minds and our brains into thinking that, oh, these things are actually moving, when in fact it's just a bunch of still pictures, back to back to back. but now we can actually record real people. So with that, we'll jump into our last one of these here, which is talking about the golden age of Hollywood cinema. So that period from like the 1930s through the 1950s. So this is where we get movies like The Wizard of Oz and Citizen Kane and Gone with the Wind and a bunch of those kind of classic films, black and white films that you may or may not have heard of. But the other reason this era of film is super important is because it gives us a lot of other innovations that we still use today that deal with, color and sound and some other stuff that he'll talk about. So super important era that kind of lays the groundwork for how studios work today still and a bunch of that stuff. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So make sure, like before, we are following along with this. I will ask a kind of wrap up question when we're done. So make sure you are following along so you can answer that. And then I will explain our web quest activity and then we'll be good to go. Okay, so here we go with this.
When I say Hollywood, you probably think of big budget movies, star-studded premieres, and studios with giant backlots pumping out film after film. Most of those associations really began sometime between the 1920s and the 1950s. Once audiences could hear actors speak, listen to pre-recorded musical scores, and enjoy sound effects, film cemented its place as the main medium for mass communication, art, and commerce. And as important as Hollywood was during the silent era, nobody could compete after the arrival of sound. New major film studios emerged, each with their own style and favorite celebrities. Before George Clooney and Jennifer Lawrence, there was Clark Gable and Janet Leigh. This cascade of films led to more technological innovations too, like color film and the widescreen formats we still use today. This was the golden age of Hollywood. Hollywood. Ba-ba-da-ba-da. Okay, I'll stop. After the stock market crash in October of 1929, most parts of the American economy took a real hit, but not Hollywood. And at the height of the Great Depression in 1933, roughly a quarter of the American workforce couldn't find a job, and millions of others were barely making ends meet. So you'd think that the last thing people would do with their hard-earned money was go to the movies. And yet, the Depression was one of the best things to happen to the American film business. That's depressing. In fact, more films were released by the major studios during the 1920s and 30s than any other decade, averaging about 800 a year compared to less than 500 per year today. It was cheaper to go to the movies than a play or a concert, and cinema became a means of escape. As we've talked about, films are an illusion of reality, and that illusion was super attractive to people whose day-to-day reality was often pretty bleak. Genre films became more popular, things like gangster films, musicals, westerns, and screwball comedies. Anything to take people's mind off their own struggles and celebrate good old American values of optimism, resilience, ambition, and courage. At the height of Hollywood's golden age, 5 film studios ruled the town. All 5 were vertically integrated, just like the major studios of the silent era. They each had their own distinct reputations and focused on different kinds of films. First up, we have Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, which was the biggest studio in the 1930s. Louis B. Mayer ran MGM with his business partner, Irving Thalberg. Mayer was the savvy businessman of the two. He approved the budgets and oversaw the distribution and marketing. Thalberg, on the other hand, was a former producer and the mind behind the stories and actual production. Together, they made slick, big-budget musicals, comedies, melodramas, and literary adaptations, sparing no expense on sets, costumes, extras, and the biggest movie stars. Think of The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and Mutiny on the Bounty. I'm talking opulence, people. Next is Paramount Pictures, which was known as the most European studio because they lured a lot of filmmakers away from Germany and the UK. They also gave these filmmakers more leeway to put their own stamp on movies. Hits like Shanghai Express, The Sign of the Cross, and Morocco. Our third player, Warner Brothers, branded itself as the studio of the working class. They turned out low-budget melodramas, gritty gangster movies like The Public Enemy with James Cagney, and musicals set in the Depression like Footlight Parade with James Cagney. The fourth major studio was 20th Century Fox, which made its reputation thanks to its chief director and its most profitable star, not James Cagney. The director was John Ford, who won back-to-back Best Director Oscars for The Grapes of Wrath and How Green Was My Valley, while
So notice, hang on.
Shirley Temple sang and danced her way through a string of wholesome hits. And lastly, RKO was the home of the extremely popular Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers musicals. Can I do a dance number, Nick?
All right, so notice something that's not quite the same for what we have today is a lot of these studios had specific actors that they had contracted with them. So almost like, NBA teams or NFL teams or stuff that have, players and then like maybe a player gets traded or whatever. They had these studios that they had these actors contracted to only work with that studios. Like he says, RKO, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire only work with RKO. James Cagney only works with MGM or whatever it was. And they only do movies for them. And then if they did a movie for another studio, they would have to get permission and stuff like that. Versus today, that's not the way it works anymore. Like George Clooney can do one movie and it's for Warner Brothers, and then he can do another movie and it's for Universal, and then he'll do another one, maybe it's like an independent one and it's for like A24. Okay, but back in the day, that's how these studios kind of stayed afloat and kept making money, was because people would come to see the stars. So like, oh, this person's in this movie, I want to go see them, and they know that that person only makes movies for Fox or MGM, and so that's how the studios kind of stay afloat at the beginning of this time. So interesting way that it was kind of done back then versus now.
RKO also took a lot of chances, producing everything from Howard Hawks' screwball comedy Bringing Up Baby to the 1933 version of King Kong, and one of the most influential films of all time, Citizen Kane. Never heard of it. Now, all 5 of these studios dominated the production, distribution, and exhibition of films for a while, but a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1948, along with the coming of television, signaled a major turning point. In the case, known as United States versus Paramount Pictures, the government argued that the major studios were in violation of antitrust laws. In other words, by owning both the production studios and the movie theaters, they were exercising an unfair monopoly and stifling competition. The Supreme Court agreed and forced the studios to break up their business, sell their theaters, and focus on just production and distribution. Hollywood continued to lead the global film market for another 10 or 15 years, but that near complete control over the industry was ending. We'll talk a lot more about this next time. Now, the golden age of Hollywood saw some major technical leaps in the film business too, including color. Filmmakers have been experimenting with color since the dawn of cinema. The earliest techniques involved hand-tinting individual frames, a painstaking process that had to be repeated for each print of each film. Not great. Over the next few decades, engineers found ways to use stencils to tint films much faster. They also developed other means of adding color, like bathing the film stock in dyes that fit the mood of the scene, called toning. Red for violence, blue for sorrow, green for grassy. By the mid-1920s, nearly 90% of Hollywood films were either tinted, toned, or some combination of the two, which was great, except color itself looked wildly artificial. And once Hollywood converted to sound on film technology, the tinting interfered with the film stock's ability to record proper sound. Crash course film history. TLDR, it's hard. So filmmakers needed to figure out color cinematography, capturing color with the image. As early as 1861, a Scottish physicist named James Clerk Maxwell, who we talked about in Crash Course Physics, well, I didn't, Shinny did, built the foundations of color photography. The light all around us is made up of a spectrum of different wavelengths, some of which we see as visible colors. Knowing this, Maxwell figured out that all these colors can be derived from some combination of red, yellow, and blue. Beginning in 1906, artists and engineers tried for 15 years to use this technology to achieve color cinematography. But, much like me in high school, they kept failing. Their experiments were unreliable or too expensive. Then along came Technicolor. In 1922, the Technicolor Corporation saw its first success with a special beam-splitting camera that could make 2 separate negatives. The light entered the camera and was split into different wavelengths, just like how sunlight hits a prism and splits into a rainbow. Half continued straight ahead, while the other half was diverted 90 degrees to produce 2 film negatives. These negatives were chemically treated, dyed either red or blue, and cemented together. Then you could run that final film strip through a regular projector, and voila! Even though they weren't spot on, the colors in these films were more reliable and accurate than any of the earlier attempts. And while that beam-splitting camera was expensive, at least theaters didn't have to buy new projectors to show color films. Over the next decade, Technicolor expanded its system into a 3-color process with a camera that recorded the original image into 3 separate negatives, red, blue, and green. And by 1932, this process created such high-quality, vibrant results that Technicolor ended up with a virtual monopoly on color film for the next 20 years. Throughout the 1930s, filmmakers and studios gradually began playing around with Technicolor. By the middle of the decade, producer David O. Selznick turned a corner by casting big stars in color films for the first time. And as the 1930s came to a close, Hollywood released a series of high-profile hits that proved color was here to stay. These films that used Technicolor range from the Errol Flynn swashbuckler The Adventures of Robin Hood to classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and even animated features like Disney's Snow White and Pinocchio. Advances in
So you see a lot of Technicolor films there, and especially you mentioned The Wizard of Oz a couple times. Wizard of Oz is like the one of the first ones, if not the first, like major film to use that kind of Technicolor technology. Because if you've seen it, you know, okay, it starts in black and white, and then when Dorothy gets to Oz, now it's this bright, beautiful, vibrant color. And at that time, when people would have went to see that, a lot of people wouldn't have even known that that was like possible. Because it was one of the first, movies to do that. That's why, it was such a key film. And you still see, if you watch, the end credits of movies, like the Marvel movies or some other like big, most big budget studio ones, you'll still see a Technicolor logo in there somewhere or another. It's still a technology that's used today.
Advances in color cinematography would continue to develop over the years, but the basics stayed the same until film stock gave way to digital video in the 21st century. Now, a third technical element of cinema was standardized during the golden age of Hollywood. It's a little something called aspect ratio. That's the ratio of the movie screen's width to its height. Back in 1932, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the folks who give out the Oscars, established a standard aspect ratio of 4:3, which looks like this. Also known as the Academy aperture, this ratio isn't a square, but it's closer to a square than we're used to these days. That's because most movies we see today are shot in an aspect ratio of 16:9, which looks like this. That's more like it. We often call this widescreen, and so much film and TV is shot at this ratio that most new screens are built to fit it. But those are just two possible aspect ratios. Back in the 1950s, some filmmakers experimented with an extreme widescreen ratio called Cinerama. This process involved shooting a film with three separate synchronized cameras hooked together in an arc and projecting it from three synchronized projectors. Weird. The screen was shaped in a similar arc, kind of wrapping itself around the audience, for a real immersive experience. And the final aspect ratio of Cinerama was about 8:3, which looks like this. The most famous film shot in Cinerama was the Western epic How the West Was Won. But, as you can probably guess, this process was too expensive and complicated to achieve widespread use. It was bad for performers' necks. On the heels of Cinerama came Cinemascope. Rather than shooting with multiple cameras, Cinemascope utilized something called an anamorphic lens. This was a special lens for cameras that recorded a wider image but squeezed it laterally so that everything would fit onto standard 35mm film stock. When the film was projected, a similar lens attached to the projector would unsqueeze the image, expanding it back out and projecting it up onto the screen. The result was an impressive 2:55:1 aspect ratio. Audiences got their first taste of it in the 1953 biblical epic The Robe, and by the end of that year, every major Hollywood studio except Paramount was licensed to make Cinemascope films. Over time, the ratio was reduced to 2:35:1, and in the mid-1950s, the American film industry had almost entirely converted to shooting anamorphic widescreen films. It took some time for filmmakers to adjust to widescreen shooting. When you move from an aspect ratio of 4:3 to 16:9, that's a whole lot of extra room to fill. So what do you do with it? Well, we fill it with, knickknacks and stuff. Close-ups, especially of faces, became difficult to frame, while landscapes got easier. At first, widescreen films rewarded composition in long takes over editing. Filmmakers built their stories by filling the frame rather than cutting to new images. Genres like the Western, the musical, and large-scale epics all lent themselves to these kinds of world-building possibilities. In the end, the technical advancements of sound, color, and an aspect ratio that could surround the audience made the powerful Hollywood studios the center of the cinematic universe from the late 1920s to the late 1950s. It was a golden age whose echoes are felt in our films today. Today, we learned about how the American studio system took advantage of sound film and the Great Depression to achieve global dominance. We discussed the development of color cinematography and what it meant for filmmakers and film audiences. And we examined aspect ratio and how the move to widescreen cinema affected films being made. Next time, we'll learn about how filmmakers in Europe and the United States reacted against the formulaic movies coming out of Hollywood and created a new wave of gritty, irreverent, and innovative cinema. Crash Course Film.
All right, so there we have it with the final crash course video. So we talked about a bunch of stuff there. Some stuff may have looked, some stuff in movies may have looked familiar, some may have not. But a lot of really key, innovations there. And welcome to some of the other people that have joined us. Hey, Kira, Miguel, hey, Bev. All right. So I know some of us joined us a little late, but those of us who were here and following along, oh, and Gianna is here too. Excellent. All right. Those of us who were here and were able to catch the whole thing and we're following along, here is a kind of recap question that I will put in the chat now. All right. This one's going to be multiple choice. All right. So you can just give me the answer, the letter in the chat. But which of the following were major innovations? Which of the following were major innovations that came from the golden age of Hollywood cinema? Was it A, sound? Was it B, color? Was it C, aspect ratio? Was it D, all of the above? All right. Take a minute or two, think about that, and give me your best guess or answer, if you are confident, in the chat. And we will go from there, right? Talked about a couple different, talked about a bunch of different things in there. A lot of different innovations, a lot of stuff we might still see today. So which of those that I listed are ones that he mentioned were part of this golden age? All right, I have one answer in there from Miguel already. He says D, all of the above. All right. So let's give everybody about another minute or two. I'd like to get maybe 2 or 3 more in there if we can, because we got a pretty nice crowd here now today. So who else has a thought? Do we agree with Miguel and think it is also D? Do we think it's something else?
What is aspect innovation?
What is
Well, what?
aspect ratio?
Yeah, aspect ratio.
So that is the difference between the height and the width of the frame. All right.
On screen.
We get like on the screens. So that's when he was
I thought they
talking
didn't
about.
care about color though. That's why it was black and white. Or
It
this
was
is
originally.
color.
And then when they when they figured out, oh, now we have the technology to put color into it, then that became kind of like a big thing. But yeah, aspect ratio is kind of the height and width of the shot that we see. So that's when he was talking about shooting stuff in widescreen or like in Cinerama, where it was like 3 different cameras that gave it like almost like an art picture. And yes, Kanaya, we are. Welcome back. All right. So Miguel says D's, Nelly
We
says
writing?
Jair also says all of them. Say it one more time.
Are we writing something down or are we just talking?
We're just talking for right now. Yeah.
Okay.
There is, I put a question in the chat about the video that we just watched, but since you just joined us, you can just kind of sit tight while we discuss this. But yeah, so we have a couple other answers in here. Miguel says D, Zane says all of them. Jair also says D, all the above, and they would all be correct. All of those are major innovations that we get from the golden age of cinema. Sound. So we move out of the silent film era. We figure out how to record image and sound at the same time, and then we get color. So we have the Technicolor technology, like with the Wizard of Oz and Snow White and a bunch of those movies, where now we figure out how to kind of split the, use certain lenses that split the light from the camera to give us, different colors on the film, and then we can like edit them together. And then we also have the aspect ratio innovation, like Jerry was talking about with widescreen and excuse me, widescreen, Cinemascope, things like that. If any of you are Quentin Tarantino fans and have seen films like Django Unchained or The Hateful Eight, some of his movies he shoots on, different film or like in those different ratios. So I would go back and watch those and maybe see if you could pick it out. But yeah, really good job. All of those are key innovations that we get from that golden age era. So you can see how important that era is to movie making and in general. And we still have a lot of stuff that we use today that we got there. All right. Really, really good job. So then, ladies and gents, to wrap up our kind of, background film history portion of this project before we actually dive into watching our film and doing that film study. All right. We are going to do a web quest to kind of wrap stuff up. So here is the deal. I'm going to share my screen real quick and show you guys how this is going to work. All right. So here is our web quest. It is on a Google Doc, all right, because it is not in Summit. So since it is not in Summit, the way you guys are going to fill this out is I'm going to share this with everybody to your Yes Philly email. And then when you get it shared with you, what you're going to do is go up here to where it says File, all right? And then you're going to hit Make a Copy, right? And then this little box is going to come up. You don't have to click on anything else, change anything else, right? You're just going to hit OK. And then I'm not going to do it on mine because I already have the original. But then another one is going to pop up. And up here in the title, it should say copy of Filmmaking Web Quest. So it'll look like this. Copy of blah, 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 right? And that's how you'll know you've made a copy. And then once you make the copy, you'll be able to write on it and answer it on there. That way, everybody can work on their own, and we're not all trying to work on the same original one that I've made. Okay. And then the way you're going to do this is you're going to use the links they have provided to answer the questions they're asking you. So, for example, in this first section here, it's talking about the stages of filmmaking. So, what goes on in each stage, right? So, I would, click this link here. I don't think this first one works. So, that's why they have two here, right? So, I would click this link. It would bring me to this page. And now you can see the 3 stages of filmmaking: pre-production, production, post-production, and it kind of gives me a definition here. So then I can go back to the web quest and say, okay, I can read up and then say this is what happens in pre-production, and then so on and so forth. And now I'm going to do the same thing with this link. Give 6 examples of different methods of filmmaking using the link below. So I would click this link.
Could you put your summit code in the chat?
Yeah. Yes, I can. So I would click this link. Now I would read through this until I see something about different uh, types of filmmaking. All right, and then or different methods of filmmaking, I should say, and then I could put them in this list here, and then keep doing the same thing throughout the whole web quest. All right. So again, I will put the Summit code in the chat, but know that this activity is not on Summit, right? Again, I'm going to share it with you guys in your Yes Philly email because it's on a Google Doc. And when you get that Google Doc, I want you to make a copy of it. And you can do that by coming up here to where it says File, click Make a Copy, and then you just click OK. And then a new one should pop up in a new tab. And then it should say Copy of Filmmaking Web Quest. And that's the one you can work from. And the original one you can close out. All right. And when I share this with you, you'll only be viewers of the original. So you won't be able to write on it until you make a copy. That's just a way where I can ensure that everybody is kind of following directions and we're not all answering on the same one. Okay.
What time will we be done with this and share it with you?
So I'd like to see this. So this is going to go on the first progress report. That's a good question, Jair. Thank you. So this is going to go on the first progress report. So I'd like to see this by end of day tomorrow, meaning so you have till like midnight Saturday. But if for some reason you feel you might need a little bit more time to finish it, I will accept it up until 8 a.m. Monday morning. Okay. After that, I have to take what you have, or if you haven't started it, then it'll just be incomplete because I have to get the grades in for the progress report. All right. But I know I'm introducing this to you guys at the end of the week rather than at the beginning of the week. So I want to make sure everybody has enough time to work on this. But if you sit down and block out, 45 minutes or an hour to do this, it should not take you longer than that. Okay. But that should answer your question as to when I'm looking for this to be due. Okay. Any other questions with this? That's a good question. Thank you. All right. So here's what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to do 2 things now. Number 1, I'm going to share this to your Yes Philly email. Again, when you get it, make sure you make a copy of it and you work from that copy. Okay. And then I will also put the Summit code in the chat just in case anybody still has to register. All right. So let me make sure I have everybody here that I'm sharing it to. All right, I got you. Bev McGowan, Jan. All right, Kira and Relisha. Okay. Okay, so this should be coming to your Yes Philly email right now. Again, remember, when you get it, make sure you make a copy. And then you can go ahead and get started from this. So ladies and gents, what I'd like you to do is give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat to let me know that you've gotten this in your Yes Philly email and you've made a copy of it, right? By doing that in the chat, it lets me know that we're on the same page if anybody is having trouble. Who still needs it? All right, Manaya, thank you. I got yours. So again, let me know you guys got this in the chat. So I'm sure we're there. And I will put up the summit code in the chat in case anybody still needs that, because I know somebody asked. All right, so there's the summit code. All right, so I have a thumbs up from Manaya in the chat. I'd like to see some more so that I know everybody has gotten this in their email and they have made a copy. Jair, thank you. All right. Miguel, thank you. Zanelia, thank you. Great, great job. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So when you get this, make a copy, and then you are good to go to start working on this. That's going to be what we're doing for the rest of the morning. I will be in the chat here on mute in case you have questions. I will also be in the Summit Lab later today. If you have questions later on, if you're working on it, then feel free to ask me whenever. And again, I'm looking for this by the end of day Friday. If you feel you still need more time, let me know, and I will take it up until 8 a.m. Monday. After that, no more, because I got to be putting in grades for the progress report. Okay. And again, let me know in the
Did
chat.
you put the code in the code in the bio? I mean,
In the chat, I did.
Could you do it again? Because I accidentally left.
No worries. Yeah, I can put it in there again. No problem. So yeah, here, I'll send it just to you this time, so I'm not blowing up the chat. Actually, oh, there we go. I was gonna say I don't know which one's which, but the other one went away. All right, so you should have that in the chat now. Okay. Also, again, if you haven't, please let me know in the chat that you've gotten this in your Yes Philly email and you've made a copy. All right. I've heard from Zanelia, from Miguel, from Jair, from Manaya. Thank you. All right. So if I haven't listed your name, please make sure you let me know in the chat. Give me a thumbs up or a yes. Just tell me that you got this Google Doc in your Yes Philly email and you've made a copy of it. So I know that everybody is on the same page, working on the right thing. Okay. Tyquill, thank you. All right, y'all. So go ahead and get started on this. I will be in the chat on mute. Like I said, if you have questions, please give me a shout. Put them in the chat. And I will also be in the Summit Lab later today. Okay.